Okay, so it's good. Well, I have some good news. We have a book. We will continue this class. Yesterday, I called up my partner, Alessandro, and said, maybe we should just quit. We don't have a book. We're not sure what we're doing. Maybe we should wait and see if Olavo has an idea in February or March, and then we'll pick it up. But Olavo picked a book, and we have it now. It's called, this is it, The Practical Imagination. It's stories, poems, and plays, compiled by Northrop Frye, Sheridan Baker, and George Perkins. And apparently, I will be teaching you the ideas about literature from this book using the stories and plays and poetry of this book as examples. So it will be a good study of literature. And there will be short readings, and we will try to give you maybe a link to find the books and stories online. And when it's not online, then we will scan the stories and so that you can download them and you'll be able to see them. And then I myself will explain the ideas around the stories from the book. So it's a very big, fat book. I told Olavo I wanted short readings, but you know how he is. A fat book is no problem for him. When I was in college, if I saw a book like this, I would say, no way. I am not reading that book. It's too much for me. I didn't read well. I still don't read well because I have something wrong with my eyes. But we'll do it little by little, maybe a chapter at a time. And I'm excited about it. The first few stories are ones I know well already. And so we shall see. We shall see. So I'm excited about it. And we start that next week. So, English for Philosophy students is now going to be stories, poems, and plays. And the ideas around them will come from a book called The Practical Imagination. Also, I wanted to tell you that I have the first 4 students for the full immersion ESL hostel program in my house now. The first 4 students arrived this week. And one is a 21-year-old girl, and one is a 23-year-old man, and one is a 33-year-old man, and one is a 50-year-old woman. So they're broad range, and we had, excuse me, our first English, our first English course, our first class today. And it was so much fun for me to have real students to talk to, not just to see you through the camera. When I see you through the camera, I have to imagine who you are. But this morning, I could see the students, and I had a wonderful time, wonderful experience talking about how to learn language. And we are emphasizing speaking and listening because the students can read and write, at home. But here they have the opportunity to develop their speaking and listening and thinking in English. So we have a whole program to do it, and we started today. And that session where we were talking about how to learn English, how to do speaking and listening, is going to be part of this course. We recorded it, and we will attach it to all 3 levels, basic, intermediate, and advanced, because the speaking and listening portion of self-study English, the speaking and listening portion, we are going to be using a program called English Made Easy? No, it's called something like Effortless English. So in my new self-study English course, which you can subscribe to if you want, we will have a speaking and listening component. Which will be the same for all 3 levels, because the point is to develop near native fluency. And so this will be the same for all 3 levels, and we are going to use a program called Effortless English for starters. So today we pre-recorded the introduction. And in a few days it will show up on my website. And if you subscribe to the course, you can get it. My website, you can get it through Olavo's website, or you can get it through my website, which is, it's not there yet, but it's coming. Margarita Noyes .com. Okay, so you can check it out. It's a new website. It's not finished yet, but soon these courses, Self-Study English, will be on my site, and the speaking and listening will be in all 3 levels. The same course, all 3 levels. At least that's what we think right now. So it's going very well. We're all very excited and having a lot of fun with the students that we have here now. Okay, now today we are going to finish Levis. I want to say that for those of you who have started from the beginning and are still with me for this course, I appreciate you. We have come through almost a whole year of Levis, and we've come to the end. It's been difficult, and yet you're still here. So if you are still here, I appreciate you. Thank you for sticking with it. Okay, last week we read page 51 and 52. And today we will finish 52 and the first sentence of 53, and we'll be finished. And maybe we can talk a little bit about some highlights of the year, some main thoughts. We'll page through the book and remember some of the ideas that we have struggled with all year. Some that we maybe don't understand even today. Don't understand fully yet. But we do our best. So, I'll begin on page 51, rereading our section from last week, and then we will move into our final section for this week. So I'm on page 51, starting with the paragraph that says, I don't then offer a syllabus. Okay. I don't then offer a syllabus, an outlined course of studies, or a plan of campaign. My concern is to make plain the principles that must inform eventual opportunism. And when I say that these principles have their unity in the living principle, I make plain that they can't be, in the ordinary sense of the word, defined. I can only aim at conveying, tactically and evocatively, what their nature is. The definition, ideally achieved, would illustrate the logical ethos of the discipline of thought in question. The intellectual importance of the literary critical study of creative works is intimated there, and not merely of individual works, but of the literature, the creative continuity that relates them. Excuse me with my cold. I'm sorry to be sniffling. I referred to literature a short way back as the supreme creative art of language. Perhaps I ought now to take notice of 2 points about English that have some bearing on my argument. The first is that English is spoken in North America by many more people than in this country, and that the American ethos has great prestige and apparently irresistible influence. The idea that American English has, in zest, energy, and inventiveness, and so on, an obvious vital superiority over British English, and that this superiority calls for mature consideration in its bearing on the cultural future, needn't be discussed as profoundly relevant to the preoccupation of this book. The criteria of superiority that are implied lack interest. And this brings us to the other point. The creative conditions that produce the English language, that made Shakespeare possible, have vanished on that final triumph of industrialism, even more completely in America than here. Something of those conditions were behind Dickens's work. They have gone utterly, gone for good. And with them, the day-to-day creativity of the English-speaking peoples, a creativity that Eliot, in this at least distinctively an American, seemed unaware of. It is plain that the quasi-living language represented by the talk of the vast majority of the population couldn't have given the assured take-off and the continuous prompting that Dickens still enjoyed in his time, when speech was still a popular art belonging to a living culture, and Dickens had Shakespeare behind him, and, of great creative writers, not only Shakespeare. Moving on to our new portion. Here, then, is the significant upshot for us. The situation changes, and to regard change with Professor Plum as the death of the past would be to contemplate with equanimity the death of the present, which the future so rapidly becomes. The roots of tradition that still has some life in it are not dead. The full range of the English language is there in its incomparable literature, accessible to English speakers at any rate in this country, and waiting to be proved living. A new conception of the university as society's organ for a new function presses for realization. A conception that develops life's urgent enough ahnung of the new kind of effort needed if mankind is to save, for future growth, its full humanity. What, I have argued, the conception entails is the creating of an educated public that, conscious of its responsibility, shall maintain the language of creative thought and keep the full potentiality alive. The notion that the currently applauded American writers prove the vitality of the civilization that produced them is absurd and significant. What, characteristically, they demonstrate is a depressing and often repellent poverty in the range of experience, satisfaction, and human potentiality they seem to know of, and to think all. As for the famed and flattered American critics who write about the British English classics, they seem, judged by what they say about them, unable to read them. The language of heuristic thought that major literature depends on is too alien. It bears no relation to the human world they know, or to the kinds of intellectual apparatus they are familiar with and too practiced in applying. Okay. And just to move on one more sentence, I'll read it a little further. The second part of this book is devoted to judgment and analysis, and I use that formula here for the purpose for which I coined it, to serve as a substitute for practical criticism. That is, it implies primarily illustrative critiques of short poems or short passages. So he's saying the rest of the book is him illustrating how to study and criticize literature. And he's going to illustrate it using short poems and short passages for the rest of the book. And in a sense, we're going to go on and look at short poems and short pieces. We're not going to criticize them using practical criticism. I would be totally incapable of doing that, not having the rich background in the former literature to draw on. But we will be looking at the stories and allowing them to evoke images and truths and wisdom. So that's why we're not moving on with Levis, because we don't have the background. At least I surely don't. So let's go back to the beginning of the paragraph we're looking at now. Beginning with, here then is the significant upshot. What's an upshot? You know, I have never seen that word in print. It's something that we use in speech a lot, but it isn't really something that is usually written. So I'm surprised. But upshot means the main relevant point. If I say a whole bunch of stuff, and then I want to summarize and say, the main important point is this for you. In your case, what you need to hear is this. I'll say, the upshot is, and then I'll give you usually an action item. For example, I might talk about the economy and talk about the falling prices of housing and the difficulty of getting credit, and how mortgage interest rates are rising or low, and I'll talk about all this stuff, and you'll be like, oh, 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 oh. And when I get to the end, and you're just like, oh, I'll say, the upshot is you need to buy a house now. So usually the upshot is the application of a large amount of seemingly unrelated information that comes to a point and says, you should do this, or this is the point for you. It's the upshot. Here then is the significant upshot for us. Now, in a construction like this, here then is the significant upshot. I would be tempted to look in the paragraph above, because you give all the information and then you say, here's the upshot. Well, you would look above. But in this case, I think he is giving it to us afterwards. The situation changes. The upshot is the situation changes. In the previous paragraph, Levis spoke about the creative conditions of language in the days of Dickens and in the days of Shakespeare and before that. The situation in those days was such that ordinary people considered speech to be an art, and to speak well was something that young boys were taught and they aspired to. And to be an orator, a great orator, was admired. And even ordinary people were careful about their composition. Even if they were just writing a letter to their mother, they used careful principles of good rhetorical composition, if they were educated at all. And if you were not educated, you were considered low class, not worth as much. The truly human and humane people used language richly. However, the situation has changed. Now we have text and email and chat. And all of that is so fast that the written language is becoming sloppy, very much like speech has already become very sloppy. And even thought has become sloppy. I don't know, was it you, Alessandro, who sent me a link to a college student who was being interviewed in some intellectual questions, and he gave his opinions?
It was a video blog. It's an abortion argument was the name of the video.
Okay, it was an abortion argument. A man took a microphone and a camera to a college campus and interviewed typical American students about...
He was a medicine student.
He was a what? Medicine?
Medicine student.
Okay, so this was a medical student. And the questions that the interviewer asked were open-ended, and the medical student gave his thoughts and feelings very freely and openly. And you could see that his thought was very illogical and confused. And it was scary. It was frightening to me as an older person in the society to see this medical student who is, in our society, to be a medical student, you have to be a very good student, very intelligent and gifted. Yet his education was so bad, he couldn't think. The people today, they cannot think, they cannot write, they cannot speak. everything is sloppy. Now, Levis foresaw in 1950, I think if he could have seen 2010 in the future, he would have been very discouraged, very scared. Situations change. We no longer have an educated public. In the United States, in the 1800s, the literacy rate was very high, maybe 98%. Now the literacy rate is much lower. I don't have a statistic, and the criteria for judging literacy has actually been lowered. Situations change. So the upshot, and of course in the previous paragraph, or 2 or 3 paragraphs, Levis was saying what he advocates, what he recommends. And he said, I don't recommend a syllabus, a curriculum. I'm not waiting for a good university. I recommend opportunism. In other words, you have to look at the goal of the living principle and then look at where you are and do whatever you can. It's like in American history, the slaves would run away from their plantation in the South. And those plantations could be anywhere in the South. And they were not able to use the road to try to get to the North because people were patrolling the roads looking for runaway slaves. So, the slaves taught their children and their young people how to see the North. From the star, the North Star, from the moss on the north side, growing on the north side of the trees, from the vegetation that would grow on a north side of a hill, because it's cool on the north side in the northern hemisphere, from the direction of the sun, east to west, everything to teach them how to go north, go north, go north, go north, from any place. Well, Levis is saying, I cannot give you a map. I cannot tell you what road to take because all the roads are closed. I can show you where the North Star is. I can give you the principles. And then you have to find an opportunity to make a way and bring some students with you who will become truly educated and will keep alive the full human potential of the Brazilian race or of the human race. Today, I was speaking to the students who are in my home, asking them if they thought we should continue this class, or if we should just take a break, wait for Olavo to come up with a book in a few months. And one of the students said, he said something to the effect of, I am trying to fill the holes in my brain where stories should be. Do you understand that? He said, he meant I should have stories in my foundation. It's like a pyramid. And here is the base, the foundation. And you acquire this foundation in childhood, early childhood usually, beginning when you are 2 or 3 years old. You begin. And these are stories. Stories, simple stories that they're like an onion. You know an onion? This is an onion. See, it gets a stalk that looks like that. And this much is underground. Okay, an onion has layers. And you peel and peel and peel and peel and peel until you get to the very center. Where is the life? The life. The green shoot. Very center. Okay. And there's layers. Well, these stories are the outside layer. Stories you tell to children. Stories from the Bible. Stories from classic literature. Stories from myths and fairy tales. Folk stories. Stories that contain wisdom, human wisdom, but that are entertaining and interesting, and they teach children about life. And then when you get older, you begin to study them more, and then you get older. At this age, you are using the wisdom. For example, a friend would tell me her situation with her husband. And I would say, that reminds me of a situation in the book Jane Eyre. And I would tell the story. And then I would say, your situation is like Jane's. And you are doing the same thing. And of course, the book shows the outcome. So I could say, and this is what happened. You're on the right track. Or maybe I'll see something and it reminds me of a book and I realize I'm doing the opposite and I'm on the wrong track. So the stories that are in your foundation go up, 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 and become wisdom as you grow. Well, the student in my home said instead of having a foundation of stories, he has a bunch of gaps. He said he needs to fill up the holes with stories. Now, why am I saying this? This is something to do with the opportunism and something to do with following a star. Levis wants people to connect to literature, to the former literature, to the accumulation of wisdom of mankind that is contained in the language of literature, and carry it forward so that it can be living and productive of more humane virtues and more life, human life, a spiritual and moral life. And in order to do this, we have to find ways to educate ourselves connected to the literature of the language. Okay, so here then is the significant upshot for us. The situation changes. There are no roads. And to regard change with Professor Plum as the death of the past would be to contemplate with equanimity the death of the present, which the future so rapidly becomes. Okay, to regard change means to consider that change is, or to look at change in the same way that Professor Plum looks at change. Now, I reminded myself of Professor Plum today online. He was a John Plum. He was a Cambridge Don at the same time as Levis. And he wrote a famous book called The Death of the Past, in which he claimed that historians and people use the past in order to shape the future. The past is dead. It doesn't exist. We don't know what happened in the past. We have no real history. Forget looking for truth in the past. Just say whatever you want about the past to get people to do what you want them to do in the future. So when you X out the past and you say the past is dead, if you're willing to do that and you're okay, that means regard with or contemplate with equanimity the death of the past or the present. To contemplate with equanimity means to be at peace with. So, if I'm okay with the idea that there is no past, then I'm got to be okay with the death of the present. Because the present is nothing but the top layer of the past. And the present quickly becomes the future. Levis does not believe that the past is dead. He believes the past is living as much as the present is, more than the future. So, to regard change with Professor Plum as the death of the past would be to contemplate with equanimity the death of the present, which the future so rapidly becomes. My question in my mind at this moment is, how do we regard change with Professor Plum as the death of the past? Regard change with Professor Plum as the death of the past. Well, Professor Plum doesn't care about truth in the past. He only uses the past for his own purpose. So if we regard change, the change in circumstances, sort of uncritically, in that we don't try to learn and really understand what's happening around us, but rather we just see what we can do to try to get our own agenda forward, well, we will miss the truth of what's happening now and probably be on the wrong foot for the future. I think of Olavo. Olavo is looking at the present very hard. Olavo is seeking to understand the present because he knows that truth in the present will give the best foot forward into the future. Professor Plum doesn't really care about truth. He only cares about pushing through his ideas. So you can see that with Levis, we need to have our eyes open and our ears open. We need to understand the truth of the past and of the present so that we will be connected to reality in the future. Continuing. The roots of tradition that still has some life in it are not dead. Okay, tradition that still has some life in it. We know that tradition has life in this sentence because has is singular and tradition is singular. First I thought it was the roots has life, roots with life in it, but that can't be right because roots is plural and has is singular. So we know the structure of the sentence is the roots are not dead. The roots are not dead. What roots? The roots of tradition that has life in it. Tradition has life. Now, in Death of the Past, Professor Plum hated tradition. He thought tradition was a straitjacket to hold the human race from growth. He thought tradition was keeping people down and making them unable to progress. Professor Plum was more than a progressive. He was a radical. He did not like tradition. He wanted it to be dead. Kill it. Who needs it? Our ideas today, meaning Plum's ideas, are correct and good. Let's put forth new ideas. This was the 1960s. It was the time for radicalism in the English-speaking world. Levis says, the roots are not dead. Tradition that has life in it is not dead. Here's the tradition. Not only is it not dead, it's rich. It's rich. You can spend a lifetime peeling a layer at a time and gaining wisdom. And by the time you're at the center and the life pinnacle, you're giving life to many people. The roots of tradition that still has some life in it are not dead. No matter what Professor Plum says, the past is not dead. It still has life. The full range of the English language is there in its incomparable literature. Okay, what he's saying is the full range of the richness of the language is present in the literature. It's not dead. It's alive in the literature. Professor Plum says you cannot get to truth in the past because there was no one there to see it. Nobody alive knew George Washington, the father of our country. Nobody alive knew Jesus Christ or King David or Adam and Eve. Nobody. So, we can't get to truth. That's what Professor Plum says. But what Levis says is that in the literature, the past lives. The people who wrote the literature were eyewitnesses of the culture of their day. They put authentic speech, authentic perceptions into writing where it was fossilized. It was turned into stone, made available for future generations to see exactly as it is, in a continuous, unbroken chain, back as far as our scholarship can understand the language. So, the full range of the English language is there in its incomparable literature. Incomparable. Levis is claiming that the literature of English is incomparable. And then accessible to English speakers, at any rate, in this country. Okay, now we have to question which phrase "at any rate" goes with. First of all, what does "at any rate" mean? At any rate is a rueful, sort of ironic, sad admission that something is not what it should be. I might say, my family is terrific. Well, at any rate, they're not terrible. They're not the worst family in the world. So, at any rate, usually means that what follows is not what it should be. it's not quite good enough. It's not what we would wish. So, in this sentence, it says accessible to English speakers at any rate in this country. Now, if at any rate were attached to the first phrase, accessible to English speakers, which I don't think it is, but if it were, the sense of that phrase would be the incomparable literature, the full range of the English language, there in its incomparable literature, is accessible to English speakers at any rate, which would mean at least speakers of English can benefit from this beautiful and rich tradition. Maybe Portuguese speakers can't, or Chinese speakers can't, but at any rate, English speakers can benefit. We wish everybody could benefit, but really, realistically, only English speakers, at any rate, at least English speakers, can benefit. But I don't think that's the meaning. I really think the meaning, the at any rate, goes with the second phrase. At any rate in this country, and waiting to be proved living. At any rate in this country. I think that phrase is a diss. Remember what I said? Disrespect. It's a diss to America. The full range of the English language is there in its incomparable literature, accessible to English speakers. You would think that would be Americans, Australians, Irish, Great Britain. Accessible to English speakers. But then he says, at any rate, in this country. So I think he means, I'm pretty sure he means that the Americans, it's the British literature, the English literature, the whole corpus, the big tradition, rich literary tradition, is actually not accessible to Americans. He's going to make that clearer a little bit later in the paragraph. He thinks Americans can't understand it. And I actually agree. British literature is very difficult, even for me now. And I've loved it. But anyway, he's not talking about me. He's talking about the authors of his day, such as Hemingway, people like that. And also critics of his day from America. But anyway, at any rate means something less than one would hope. And I think he's saying it's accessible to British English-speaking peoples rather than to all English-speaking peoples. Okay, let's see. Okay, so the full range of the English language is there in its incomparable literature, accessible to English speakers at any rate in this country, and waiting to be proved living. How will it be proved living? If it gives birth to babies, if it gives birth to children, if it gives birth to a new wave of human wisdom and ideas and new literature that embodies something beautiful and something wise, something good. If it does not give birth to that, well, maybe it's dead. So it's waiting to be proved living. A new conception of the university as society's organ for a new function presses for realization. A new conception of the university. Okay, the conception of the university means a new idea for a university. Maybe I conceive of maybe I'm going to have a school, and I conceive of a school that will accept 12-year-old boys and will teach them how to do math and how to write a good essay and how to speak and read in Latin. That's my conception for my school. And then someone else says, You need a new conception for your school. You are required by law to accept children from the age of 5 to 18, boys and girls, and you have to teach them 5 subjects a day for 12 years. Well, that's a new conception for a school. So the conception for the school is the philosophy that governs it. So, a new conception of the university as society's organ for a new function presses for realization. So they have an old conception of the university, and he doesn't elaborate on what it was. He has already given up on finding a good university, and now he says we need a new conception for university that we've got then, as apart from what we've got. What they had in his day was a rapidly expanding university, one that was accepting students who were not well qualified, students who were not prepared in the same way that other students had been in the past. There was a growing, expanding university that encompassed a large percentage of the young adults in England. It's like, whereas before you were expected to be educated through the 8th grade, and some people through the 12th, well, now everybody was expected, men and women, to go to university, even if they did not aspire to be a scholar. Maybe they only wanted to get married and raise a family or work as an electrician. Still, you have to have a university education. And true scholarship was being lost in the universities of Levis's day. Today, it's gone in many places. To go to a good university, you have to pay a lot of money, and they are very few, those which create scholars. So anyway, he's saying we need a new conception of the university. And what will be the characteristic? He goes on to say it will be society's organ for a new function. An organ is a part of the body, like the organ for the blood flow is the heart. The organ for respiration is the lungs. The organ for digestion would be the stomach. The organ of thought is the brain. So the university will become the organ for a new function in society. And when he says presses for realization, it means this idea that we need a new conception of the university to fulfill a new function. This idea is growing in people everywhere. Very few people, but a significant minority, is seeing we need a new conception of the university to become the organ of a new function in society. I believe the function of society that he's talking about is the procreative function. Procreative is having babies and sexual reproduction. In society, right now, in Levis's day, he was seeing a death of intellectual vitality, moral vitality. C.S. Lewis talked about, and I mentioned this in class before, the chestless man. A man who has words like courage and honor and integrity, but no reality. He thinks that by knowing the word, he has the virtue, but in fact, he has no nobility, he's a coward, no courage, no honor. He is a man without a chest. Lewis was a contemporary of Levis. So, in this society, Levis was beginning to see that we were giving birth to a generation of Homo sapiens, people who are human beings, but who lack spiritual reality, lack the image of God. The image of God is lacking. We are just human animals. So in a sense, humanity in its essential characteristic was dead. It was not giving birth to new humans, but only to these stunted drones. So the organ of society, the new function, is to be able to bring forth an educated public that can maintain the tradition of full humanity. And the university should be the organ that fulfills this new function. Now I'm going to read the sentence again and continue. A new conception of the university as society's organ for a new function presses for realization. Presses for realization is a very vivid kind of construction. This idea is not just out there. It's building power, like a head of steam about to burst forth from the tea kettle and start whistling, start shrieking because of pressure building up. This idea is pressing for realization. It's like some of the big ideas in American history, like women's right to vote, or civil rights, or abolish slavery. It pressed and pressed and pressed until it broke through and became general common value, common knowledge. And then it became enshrined in law. Well, the idea that we need a new conception of the university, Levis says, is an idea that is pressing for realization. A conception that develops life's urgent enough ahnung of the new kind of effort needed if mankind is to save for future growth its full humanity. Okay, a new conception of the university corresponds to the second half, a conception that develops life's urgent enough ahnung of the new kind of effort needed if mankind is to save for future growth its full humanity. I think we better take this sentence apart. I hope we do finish tonight. We should finish tonight, but I don't know if you want me to blow off this paragraph. Probably not. If I blow off, that means I don't go deep. I don't do justice. I just sort of skate over difficulties. I think it would be better to take one more week and finish well than to blow this off just so that we can finish. So maybe we will not finish tonight. Maybe we'll have one more week. I don't want to erase my onion because I like that onion. But let's look at this sentence. Okay, first we have the new conception of the university. I'm going to just keep that in mind. New conception as society's organ for a new function. And key aspects are new conception of the university and new function. What new function for society? What new function? What new function? Okay. Now we get to the second half. Let's take it apart. A new conception of the university as society's organ for a new function presses for realization. A conception that develops life's urgent enough Ahnung of the new kind of effort needed if mankind is to save for future growth its full humanity. Okay, we've got to find the main sentence. A conception that develops life's Ahnung of the kind of effort needed to save humanity. Okay. I'm going to underline this, make a mark here. We have a very difficult sentence, Alessandro, which makes me think we may not finish tonight. Okay. A conception. So here we are. And we know it's a conception of the university. Okay. A conception that develops Okay, first, let's stop there. A conception of the university that develops. Now, develops means nurtures. And in my example, I have a conception of a school, which will be for just 12-year-old boys to learn math, composition, and Latin. Well, my conception of the school, my school, will develop a certain kind of rationality in boys, a logical rationality. Mathematics is very logical. It's not going to ask them how they feel about something. It's going to say a logical step, another logical step, another logical step, a correct or incorrect answer. And to write an essay is the same way. You propound a thesis, you support it logically, support it logically, support it logically, come to a sound conclusion. And Latin, it works. Every part works together, and you have to know how they fit together. So my conception of a school would develop the logical, objective, clear-thinking ability of boys. This is getting at a conception of the university that will develop ... something that Levis wants us to develop. Now remember, we're thinking of a new kind of university, not like the university of Levis's past, which was already disappearing, not like the university of Levis's present, which was expanding to include all young people, but dumbing down its characteristics. We need a new conception of a university which will fulfill a new function in society. Well, what was the old function? Well, in the olden days for Levis, the old function was to keep alive the tradition of thought from antiquity, from early times, by studying original languages, ancient languages, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, by studying original documents, transcribing, almost like the monastic tradition, studying the classics, so that at the core of civilization there would be high culture, and that high culture could disseminate through the regular people, through speech and lectures and writings and spiritual direction and the influence of the scholar on the civilization. That was the function of the university, was to produce scholars who were connected to the deep wells of tradition. In Levis's day, the function of the university was to standardize a certain level of educational functioning. Everybody is supposed to be able to read well enough to read magazines and newspapers and consume propaganda from the government. Everyone is supposed to be able to have a smattering of languages, of history, government, a smattering. Smattering. TT. Everybody's supposed to have a smattering of subjects, of knowledge of subjects, but it's not supposed to go deep. It's like sprinkling salt on the skin of a living person. The salt is not going to go deep and salt the meat because they're alive. It's only going to be on the surface. So, the university provided people with a smattering of knowledge so that they could feel educated and highbrow and puff themselves up in their ego. But in fact, they will have no chest. In fact, they will have no deep knowledge, and they'll be easy to control. So we need a new function for the university. And the new conception of the university, that develops what? Life's urgent enough Ahnung of the new kind of effort needed if mankind is to save for future growth its full humanity. Okay. A conception that develops life's Ahnung. Life is personified. He doesn't mean any individual. He means the tendency of humanity to desire spiritual food or to desire something more noble or more upright, something more like God. The tendency of people made in God's image to desire God. Life is humanity. And an individual person is a representative of life, but only carries a little piece of it. Ahnung. I had to refresh my memory today of what Ahnung meant, and it means inkling. I bet you can't read that. It's probably too small, so I'll write it bigger here. Inkling. An inkling is a thought, a little thought. For example, all of us have an inkling of what heaven might be like. A little image that comes from reading the Bible or hearing a priest speak. Maybe a little brief vision. Certainly not much more than that. Nothing comprehensive. We do not really know what heaven is like, but we have a brief glimpse, brief inkling. That's what Ahnung means. So, we want a conception of the university that will develop the inkling of life, the inkling of what new kind of effort is needed if mankind is to save its full humanity. So, a conception that develops life's, I'm gonna change from Ahnung to idea. But remember, it means a little idea. A conception that develops life's idea of what kind of effort is needed to save humanity. Okay, I've left out a lot. By save humanity, we mean the highest aspect of humanity, the image of God in man, the noble aspect, the spiritual aspect. The physical aspect isn't necessarily in danger. What we see is masses of people who are kind of like animals, who have no upper aspect to themselves. Okay? So to save the full humanity will take a certain kind of effort. The kind of effort that draws small groups of people together in the evening after work and does studies with them, book studies or discussions, or whatever. You have to be opportunistic. Olavo is opportunistic. He has a radio show. He has an online course. He has brought me in to teach books that he chooses. This is opportunistic. He's using technology to reach thousands of people, which Levis never thought of. Although Levis wrote books, which also reached thousands of people. So anyway, a conception of the university that develops life's inkling of the kind of effort that is needed to save humanity. So, we need a new conception of the university as society's organ for a new function. The function is to develop life's strong enough, is that what it says here? Urgent enough. Urgent enough. Life has a little bit of a desire for something higher, and the university is supposed to catch it, blow on it like a little spark of life, and make it grow, using various kinds of effort. So the university is supposed to develop this flame so that individuals will exert the right kind of effort in the society to save the society broadly. So I think that's the whole sentence. So let me reread the whole sentence. A new conception of the university as society's organ for a new function presses for realization. A conception that develops life's urgent enough Ahnung of the new kind of effort needed if mankind is to save, for future growth, its full humanity. I want to point out the use of this conditional if mankind is to save. That structure implies some doubt. Maybe mankind will not save for future growth its full humanity. But if it is to save it, it will have to be through certain kinds of effort. Okay, what I have argued the conception entails is the creating of an educated public that, conscious of its responsibility, shall maintain the language of creative thought and keep the full potentiality alive. When I read that sentence, I think of the homeschool movement in America. The homeschool movement began maybe in the 1970s or 80s as a result of the debasement of the public school system. It was like the university in Levis's day that expanded to include everybody and thereby destroyed itself. It's like if you have a glass of fine wine, just a small 2 ounces of the most excellent wine, and you decide that you need to give some to 1,000 people, so you just decide you're going to add water. So you take your wine and you put it in a big bowl and you add, 2 gallons of water so that everybody can have a small sip of wine. Well, what they're getting is water. You have destroyed the wine. Well, in America, the public school system destroyed itself. And kids were being graduated illiterate. And not only that, they were being taught secular humanism, atheism, bad morals, destructive lifestyles. And in addition, there was violence in the schools and unchecked violence. So people started to keep their children home. They said, I just can't send my child into this. And it was illegal. And they were arrested. And the children they tried to take them away. And I remember in the 1980s, a family that was in our church that had to live in West Virginia 2 hours away and drive in the father every day for work, because West Virginia didn't enforce so strictly the laws, and the police were trying to take the children away. And for many years in the homeschool movement, it was as though every homeschool child was a genius. They call them homeschool geniuses. My son, I've heard him called a homeschool genius. People dismiss people as being homeschool geniuses. Every child was a genius because the method of teaching at home was so much more effective that when you compared a homeschool student with a student, anyone else, they appeared to be geniuses. It was like they were not of the same species. And when my children were growing up, some people would say to me, one person in particular said, "How dare you have 4 children? Don't you know we have a population explosion on this planet? If you want to have children, you should adopt. You should not be selfish. You're selfish. You're bringing these children into the world. It's overcrowded. You're hurting the planet. You're polluting the planet with children. You are bad." And I said to her, my children are the hope of the world. Now, I didn't really realize what I was saying, but what I meant was, I am educating my children, and they will be a blessing. My children will be 1 in a million. They will be part of the solution to life's problems. The world is going down. My children will help to keep it up. I said, as many children as I can have. I said to her, I am someone who should have children because I am teaching them and raising them. My children will be worth the air they breathe and the food they eat and the space they take up. Let someone who is going to neglect her children and send them to the public school to grow up and be an animal, let that person not have children to save the planet. I'm going to have children to save the planet. In the homeschool movement, every child looked like they were going to be a blessing in whatever sphere they walked in, whether they became an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or a veterinarian or a woman who raises children or a teacher. There was a story of a family. Their name was the Swans. And they had 10 kids. And each of those children got a master's degree by the age of 16 through homeschool. Every one of them did it because they had a program. And it graduated them from high school at 13 or 14, master's degree 16. Then at 16, you have a person with a master's degree, but they're only 16. You can't really get a job. So the question is, what does the world do with a 16-year-old who has finished their education to master's level? Well, one of the boys got a job in the public school as a teaching assistant. And he had never been to school before one day in his life. His first day in school was as a teacher. And he looked around and he was like, this is crazy, what was going on. So they gave him a few students who were failing. And they took those students out of the class and gave them to this boy. I think his name was Benjamin Swan, 16 years old. Well, what was he supposed to do? He didn't know how to teach in the school. All he knew is what his mother did to him. So he used the same methods his mother used in homeschool. Exactly the same. He did unto them what had been done unto him. And before you knew it, the kids turned around and began to make A's. They were new kids. And then the school pulled them out and put them back in regular class, and they went straight downhill. Benjamin Swan hit the public school system and turned around every kid he was allowed to influence. I think this is what Levis is talking about. He's talking about opportunism. He's talking about creating an educated public. In America, the homeschool movement has produced an educated public, very small. There's one university called Patrick Henry. It's called the Homeschool College because its conception was to be a college for homeschoolers who have never been to school, who need a college degree to go out and make an impact in the world, particularly in the area of law and politics. So they used a classical approach combined with homeschool methods, and they put together a law school. Well, Patrick Henry sends their students to Capitol Hill to serve as aides and pages and junior people. And they are totally making an impact. And the liberal establishment in Capitol Hill is afraid of Patrick Henry. By themselves, this one small college has more than half of the students who are on Capitol Hill come from that one college. And they're all conservative and they're powerful. They're smart. They're effective. The debate team of Patrick Henry, which is not even accredited, beat the world champion debate team of Oxford, not once but twice, in the same year. The first year they debated them, Patrick Henry won, and then Oxford demanded a rematch and came to America, and Patrick Henry beat them again. These are kids who were homeschooled all their life. So let's read the sentence again. What I have argued is the conception, what I have argued, the conception entails, is the creating of an educated public that, conscious of its responsibility, shall maintain the language of creative thought and keep the full potentiality alive. Conscious of its responsibility. I want to write this sentence out. I believe this will be the last sentence we'll do tonight because we're 10 minutes over. So we'll have one more week of Levis, at least. I never thought I would say that. It's been a year. But I think we can have one more week of Levis because I'm really enjoying this particular bit. Okay, let's write down some of this sentence. What I have argued, the conception entails. So that's the conception. From Levis's point of view, the conception is the conception of a university. That will fulfill a new function. In society. To keep alive or save humanity by opportunistic activities. Like homeschooling. Okay, now, the conception entails the creating of an educated public. So, the conception entails, that means a necessary ingredient of this conception. In other words, a key goal. No matter how you do it, opportunistically, any way you want, you must achieve this goal. The creation of an educated public. How are you going to do that? In the homeschool movement, it has taken 20 years to grow a crop of young adults who are educated in America. That was one opportunistic way to have parents begin to teach their own children. There are others. You could start a university. You could invite people to your home for discussion. You could make a video course like Aula. Have a radio show. I don't know. Put out pamphlets. Something. But the conception of this new university entails the goal of creating an educated public. An educated public which shall maintain the language of creative thought. Now, one aspect of this educated public is that it is conscious of its responsibility. That's the part I was telling you about when I spoke to that person about how my children will be a blessing. I was conscious. I was consciously raising a generation to be the hope of America. So it's saying an educated public that is conscious of its responsibility to be the hope of the future. Okay, conscious of its responsibility, this educated public shall maintain the language of creative thought. Language. This whole introduction has been about language. What is it about the language? Why does he use the word language to identify with creative thought? I don't know, but remember my conception, which I just threw off the cuff. I didn't plan it, but I threw off the cuff an idea of a school for boys that was for 12-year-olds to teach them math and essay writing and Latin. Well, my school would maintain the language of creative thought because it would teach the boys how to use language for logic and sound reasoning, for clarity, clear thinking, clear communication. And it would be like a school to teach a person to play scales on the piano, scales and arpeggios in every possible key, with every possible intonation of feeling, to develop skill in the use of the piano or the use of musical instruments. And then the graduate of my school would be able to go out and perform great music and creative music because they would have skill. So my conception of a school would maintain the language of creative thought. It would maintain the ability to communicate with clarity, the third order wisdom which defies comprehensive explanation. Creative thought, creative literature is the only thing that can evoke and nurture this kind of wisdom. So, we need the creation of an educated public which is conscious of its responsibility to maintain the language of creative thought in all that entails. And keep the full potentiality alive. I had a conversation with a young man over New Year's. This young man is an atheist. He is very intelligent. He is an engineering student. Most of the people at my party were Christians and were serious philosophical thinkers and logical thinkers. Some very intelligent people were at my party. I watched this young man talking to one person, and then they would go away. Another person, and then they would go away. And another person, and then they would go away. It went on like this for days. The guy stayed in my house 4 days. Day and night. Talk, 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 talk. Someone would go away. Talk, 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 go away. This guy never changed. His conversation was very learned. He acted as though he had the answers. He knew the truth. And he pointed out that you cannot know anything. There is no objective reality. Reality is subjective. What is true for you is true for you. There is no real truth, no objective truth. All that matters is what you believe. All that matters is what we agree on. What we agree on is true. There is no objective truth. These were his ideas. I was one of the last people to talk to him. And I didn't really talk to him. I yelled at him. I insulted him. I got emotional. And then he walked away. I was left standing. Last man standing. It was actually not good because I wasn't debating. I was getting emotionally involved. But this man's philosophy did not keep the full potential of human development alive. This man's philosophy killed the full potential. When you say we cannot know anything, you're saying, why talk? Why discuss? Why? There's no point if we can't know anything. To say we cannot know anything is the last thing you say. its last words. After that, there's no talk, no communication, no knowledge, no wisdom, no point. The man himself didn't believe it. Of course, he knows that you can't know anything. It was stupid. Well, in this sentence of Levis, he says, "This educated public shall maintain the language of creative thought and keep the full potentiality alive." I'm making a mark there. That's the end. In order to keep the full potentiality of human thought alive, we have to remain connected to the roots. We have to learn to think clearly. We have to have an open and clear heart to truth, coming in from the muse, from the life, capital L, life, from God. We have to be humble and not too heady, proud of our own intellectual superiority. No. We have to be opportunistic to find ways to foster intellectual life in ourselves, our children, those around us. This is what Levis recommends. We'll have one more week next week. So, if you have any questions, send them now. I'll come back in 5 minutes to discuss with you anything you want to discuss. And then we'll say goodbye for one more week. All right, the question is, do I think that it is possible to provide a high standard of education for many people? Yes, I do. Absolutely. It was done in the United States for 200 years or 100 years. There are certain principles for providing education which are classical, and if they are followed, it is possible to provide a high standard. Now, what you cannot do is make every child a scholar. Some people are meant to be workers with their hands. Plumbers, electricians, carpenters. Some people are meant to work with computers, technology, to work with fabrics, art. Everybody's different. And some people are meant to be scholars. Okay? You're not going to turn everybody into a scholar. But you can get a high standard for everybody. It is not difficult. But you have to abandon recent modern innovations in education. In the 1960s, they changed up education in America, and they got a lot of new ideas that have been disastrous. Some homeschoolers believe that there was a conspiracy to sabotage education in America. I don't know if I believe that, but certainly the changes in education in America destroyed education. So yes, I believe it is possible. One thing that is needed is local control. Parents need to be responsible for their own children's education. For most of the history of the United States, parents were responsible, and they used a variety of methods to educate their children. They used private tutors, they used home study, they used classes, small classes, several families together. They used boarding schools or day schools where they hired a teacher. But the parents controlled on a very community basis. Myself and my neighbors in our small community controlled education, and there weren't laws forcing you. Parents wanted their children educated so the children would be successful and do well and take care of them in their old age. It's natural for parents to want children to be educated. So the first principle is local control. And what we have in the United States is federal governmental control. The control of education comes all the way from Obama. It's the opposite of local control. And then above that, you really just need parents who can put their children in touch with good books. I mean, you hardly need more than good books. I'm telling you, there is a curriculum in the homeschool movement called the Robinson curriculum. Robinson. Get this. Mr. and Mrs. Robinson were both scientists. And they had a whole bunch of kids, 6, 7 kids. And they had in their home a big room where they had a big room. And both the father and mother worked in their home. They had a room for studying. And the mother was educating the children, homeschooling, using a classical approach. And then she got cancer. And she knew she was going to die. So, I think her oldest child might have been 14 or 15. And the rest of them went on back down to the age of 2 or 3 years of age. Mrs. Robinson mapped out a curriculum from kindergarten through 12th grade, which was no more nor less than choosing the books that the children would study and scanning them into the computer. Euclid for geometry, Shakespeare, great authors, original works of literature and history. So she mapped out a course of study that was books, scanned them into the computer, and then died. And the father supervised the children's education from that point on. All he did was give them a computer terminal that contained all these books and a schedule. And the children had to read and write and interact and bring their finished product to him, and he would give some corrections, send them back. And he supported the family and did his research as a scientist. His desk was in the large room, and each child had a desk in the room, and they spent class hours self-studying. And that curriculum has become a standard in the homeschool movement. It produces amazing results of people who are well educated just from reading excellent books. That's the whole curriculum. When I was looking at it, the entire curriculum was just scanned books. Now they have changed it so that they give you more of a day-to-day curriculum so that you know what to do with the books. But all Mr. Robinson did was send his kids straight through the books at their own pace. So many hours a day is spent studying. You could get this into the hands of everybody in the country. Yes, it's possible. It's easy. The problem with education is that the leftist communists are using it to make people uncritical people who will obey the government and work. I believe that. I believe they intend to produce a type of person that is uncritical and easy to control. The methods that are used are the problem. It's not hard to educate lots of people. It's a terrible insult to the teachers of America that the homeschoolers get such fabulous results. What they say is these mothers are doing nothing and their kids do better than what happens in our school when we are devoting our full-time effort and all this money to education, and our results are worse than these people who are doing nothing. That's what they say. They say we are doing nothing. My sister-in-law, who was, by the way, the person who told me I was selfish to have children at all, she also said that it was a crime that I was homeschooling my children because, she said, your children are so intelligent. If they can do this well with no education at all, it's a crime not to send them to school. Her feeling was, my children were geniuses without any training whatsoever, so if I sent them to school, they would be even better. But the truth is, it's easy to educate a child to get excellent results. I could teach someone how to do it easily. Everybody can do it. In America, people who have no education themselves can do it. Products of the public school. Our children can be well educated. All we have to do is buy the Robinson curriculum and get out of the way. Keep the child away from television, video games, no television, no video games, not too many toys, plenty of work like chores, plenty of good material for the imagination and the soul, and no bad stuff, like no inferior literature, only high quality literature, history. And you can't, it's like, how hard is it to grow a plant? You put the seed in, you give it some water, some sunshine, and it grows. That's how education is. That's what I believe. I think the schools may be trying to get bad results because it's not so easy to keep a person from growing. But they're succeeding. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, we're done for today. If you have any other thoughts or questions, you can email them. And we'll see you next week for another week of Levis.